What do you do when the world tries to take everything from you? Not with a bang, but with a piece of paper. With a law that feels like it was written specifically to watch you fail. Have you ever felt that? That feeling of being backed into a corner where the rules are the weapon and you're the target? It's a feeling that suffocates you. But for some people, in some moments, that pressure doesn't crush them. It turns them into diamonds. Or, in the case of the story we're talking about today, it forges them into something harder than steel. This is the story of Martha Coleman, and it takes place in a town called Cedar Ridge, a place carved out of the unforgiving American West, a place where the dust on the ground is as stubborn as the people who walk on it. Martha wasn't just another settler. She was a healer, a mountain physician whose knowledge of herbs and roots was the only real medicine most folks in those hills ever knew. She was respected, she was essential, and she was about to lose everything. Her father, Josiah, had been a brilliant man, a freed slave who had worked and saved and outsmarted his way to owning 1,200 acres of prime mountain land that, as it turned out, was sitting on a fortune in silver. When he passed, he left it all to Martha, his entire legacy in her hands. But a legacy can be a heavy thing to carry, especially when powerful men want to take it from you. The local territorial court, with its ink-stained fingers and questionable motives, dropped a hammer on her. A statute, conveniently specific, declared that an unmarried woman inheriting such large property had exactly 30 days to marry, or she would forfeit the entire estate. 30 days. And when our story begins, 23 of them have already bled away. She has 7 days left. 7 days to find a husband or watch her father's life's work get swallowed whole. And the man waiting to do the swallowing? Mayor Aldrich. He was the kind of man who owned half the town and had his hooks in the other half. A smiling viper who had been circling the Coleman land for years. He made sure the first 3 men who came courting Martha suddenly found pressing business elsewhere. One remembered a sick aunt in Missouri. Another discovered a sudden passion for the California gold rush. He didn't use a gun to clear his path. He used whispers, favors, and threats veiled as friendly advice. With the clock ticking down to 0, Martha was out of options, out of time, out of hope. So she did the only thing a cornered animal can do. She didn't just fight back. She changed the entire game. She walked into the dusty town plaza, her back straight, her resolve like iron, and she scanned the crowd. Her eyes landed on a stranger, a man named Samuel/Sam Hawkins, a drifter by the looks of him, with trail dust on his clothes and quiet stillness that set him apart from the loud, boastful men around him. He hadn't laughed or jeered as she passed. He just watched. And in front of the entire town, in a voice that cut through the afternoon haze, Martha Coleman made him a proposition that would echo through the mountains. She asked him to marry her, not for love, for business, a contract. Her proposal was simple and insane. Marry her, and he'd get a 20% share of all silver profits from the land, his name on a piece of paper, in exchange for helping her keep the legacy her father had bled for. But as they spoke privately, away from the shocked whispers of the town, she revealed the true, rotten core of her predicament. This wasn't just about a legal loophole. It was about murder. She told Sam she believed, no, she knew, that Mayor Aldrich hadn't just waited for her father to die. She suspected he had helped him along, slowly poisoning him with mercury.
a poison that mimics illness, confuses the mind, and leaves almost no trace. This wasn't a fight for land anymore. It was a fight for justice, for vengeance. And in the eyes of this quiet stranger, she saw a flicker of something, a recognition of that same burning injustice. Sam Hawkins had his own history with powerful men who stole from the common folk. His own father had lost a farm to legal trickery, to the kind of corruption that Aldrich represented. Maybe he saw a ghost of his own past in Martha's fight. Maybe he just knew a righteous cause when he saw one. Whatever the reason, he agreed. But Sam was no fool. He knew a man like Aldrich wouldn't be stopped by a simple marriage certificate. If they were going to do this, they had to be faster, smarter. He looked at Martha and said they weren't waiting another day. They were getting married that night. A preemptive strike before the enemy even knew the battle had begun. That evening, in a small, bare-bones church, the ceremony took place. There were no flowers, no celebration. The air was thick with tension, not joy. Their only witnesses were two of the town's outcasts, people who also knew what it was like to be on the outside of Aldrich's favor. There was Mrs. Chen, an elderly Chinese woman whose dignity was a fortress, and old Pete Winters, a prospector whose hands were gnarled, but whose eyes missed nothing. They stood as witnesses, their silent act of rebellion. The vows were exchanged, simple and stark. It was a business deal sealed before God. But just as they signed the register, making it legal and binding, the church doors burst open. And there stood Jake Morrison, Aldrich's foreman, with three of his thugs backing him up. He wasn't there to offer congratulations. He sneered, his eyes filled with contempt, and tossed a stack of papers onto a pew. A message from the mayor. A forged collection of debts, claiming Josiah Coleman had borrowed heavily against future silver production, and the full amount was due by the end of the week. It was a lie, a blatant, ugly lie. But in a town where Aldrich controlled the law, a piece of paper on official paper could be as deadly as a bullet. It was their first test. Morrison was there to intimidate, to show them that a piece of paper wouldn't save them, that this was Aldrich's town, and they were just playing in it. This was the opening shot in a war that had just been declared. Aldrich's first move was cowardly, and it came in the dead of night. Fire. He sent his men to burn down Martha's supply shed, the small building where she kept her herbs and remedies that were her livelihood. It wasn't just an attack on her property, it was an attack on her identity, on her ability to heal and help the very people Aldrich sought to control. It was a message: I can take everything from you. But Aldrich made a critical mistake. He underestimated his opponents. He thought he was fighting a lone woman and a hired gun. He was wrong. He was fighting a brilliant mind and a master strategist. Sam didn't just see the ashes, he saw the opportunity. Poking through the embers, he found what he was looking for. A single, clear boot print in the soft earth, left behind by one of the arsonists in his haste. A boot print that matched Jake Morrison's perfectly. And this is where the genius of their counterattack begins. Sam didn't ride out for a gunfight. That's what Aldrich wanted, an excuse to brand him a violent drifter and have him arrested or shot. Instead, Sam took the evidence and walked straight into the saloon,
right into the heart of the lion's den. In front of a crowd of onlookers, he didn't accuse Morrison of arson. He calmly, coldly presented the proof. He didn't demand blood. He demanded payment. $60, he said, for the cost of the destroyed supplies and lumber. He turned a violent crime into a public debt. He humiliated Morrison, forcing him to empty his pockets in front of the very men he was supposed to lead. He made Aldrich's top enforcer look weak, foolish, and clumsy. It was a masterstroke of psychological warfare. But that was just the opening salvo. Martha and Sam realized they couldn't win this war defensively. They had to go on the offensive. They began to walk the town, not with weapons, but with words. They spoke to the other business owners, the blacksmith, the general store owner, the stable master. Martha, with her sharp legal mind, pointed out exactly how Aldrich's contracts and fees were slowly bleeding them dry. Sam, with his quiet authority, made them feel for the first time that they weren't alone in their resentment. They weren't starting a rebellion. They were simply holding up a mirror, showing the townspeople the bars of the cage they were already in. Their new alliance was tested almost immediately. Aldrich tried to evict Mrs. Chan, their wedding witness, using a trumped-up and illegal ordinance. His men showed up to throw her out on the street, but this time Sam and Martha were there, and they weren't alone. A small crowd of other merchants, emboldened by their talks, stood with them. Martha, with her sharp legal mind, pointed out exactly how Aldrich's contracts and fees were slowly bleeding them dry. Sam, with his quiet authority, made them feel for the first time that they weren't alone in their resentment. They stood by, his presence a clear warning that this would not be settled by force. Aldrich's men, faced with legal truth and the threat of a united citizenry, were forced to back down.
They had drawn a line in the sand. They had shown the town that Aldrich's power wasn't absolute. It could be challenged. Seeing their chance, Martha used her knowledge of civic law to make the boldest move yet. She formally called for a town meeting, a public forum to challenge the mayor's authority. It was a direct, open declaration of war. The battle for Cedar Ridge was no longer happening in the shadows. It was about to happen in the open for all to see. The town meeting was set. Tensions were at a breaking point, and it was then that fate intervened in the most tragic way possible. A young boy in town, Timothy Johnson, fell gravely ill. A raging fever had taken hold, and he was fading fast. The town doctor, a man who conveniently happened to be Mayor Aldrich's cousin, had tried his usual tonics and remedies, but nothing worked. He had given up, telling the boy's parents to prepare for the worst. For Aldrich, this was an opportunity. He saw a town gripped with fear and grief, and he planned to use it. He would position himself as the voice of order in a time of tragedy. But for Martha, this wasn't about politics. It was about a child's life. As the boy lay dying, his desperate parents, having heard stories of Martha's skills, sent for her. When she arrived, Aldrich was already there, blocking her way. He forbade her from seeing the child, accusing her of being a charlatan, a hedge witch peddling snake oil. He threatened to have her arrested for practicing medicine without a license. And right there, in front of the terrified parents and a growing crowd of onlookers, the true nature of both Martha and Aldrich was laid bare. He saw a chance to consolidate power. She saw a life that needed saving. Have you ever seen a moment where everything becomes clear, where all the noise fades away and you see a person's true soul? This was that moment for the people of Cedar Ridge. Martha ignored him. She walked past the blustering mayor as if he were nothing more than a stray dog and went to the boy's bedside. She was calm, focused. She examined Timothy, her touch gentle, her eyes missing nothing. She didn't just see a fever. She saw the subtle signs the town doctor had missed, the faint rash, the specific nature of the delirium. This wasn't just a common fever. With quiet confidence, she diagnosed it Rocky Mountain spotted fever, a dangerous, often fatal illness carried by ticks, but one that could be treated if you knew how. She went to work using a potent brew of willow bark to fight the fever and other herbs to combat the infection. She didn't leave her side, tending to him through the long, dark hours of the night. And as the sun rose, the fever broke. The news spread through Cedar Ridge like a wildfire. It wasn't just a recovery. To the townspeople who had watched the official doctor fail and the powerful mayor posture, it was a miracle. Martha Coleman hadn't just saved a child, she'd exposed the incompetence and moral bankruptcy of the man they ruled. Aldrich's power was built on a foundation of fear and perceived authority. In one night, with an act of pure compassion and skill, Martha had shattered that foundation completely.
When Aldrich, furious and desperate, tried to follow through on his threat and have the sheriff arrest her, he found himself facing not a lone woman, but a wall of silent, determined townspeople. The very people he had lorded over for years now stood between him and his target. They wouldn't let him touch her. In that moment, he lost more than just his authority. He lost the town. The game had changed. News of the conflict in Cedar Ridge traveled fast, and it reached the ears of a man who actually cared about the law, Circuit Judge Carter. Word came that he, along with a U.S. Marshal, was riding to town, their arrival now weeks ahead of schedule. They were coming to investigate the source of the unrest. The final showdown wouldn't be a gunfight in the street. It'd be a battle in a courtroom. Suddenly, it was a race against time. Martha, Sam, and their growing list of allies, Mrs. Chan, Old Pete, the town merchants, formed a war council. They knew Aldrich would use the time to twist the truth, to buy witnesses and manufacture lies. They had to be ready. And then, a breakthrough. Thomas Garrett, one of the original suitors that Aldrich had scared away, returned. Racked with guilt, he came to Martha with a crucial piece of evidence. He'd confessed that he hadn't just been warned off, he'd been bought off. And during the meeting, he'd overheard Aldrich's men drunkenly bragging, laughing about how the old man Coleman had been put to sleep so the mayor could get his land. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a confession. Aldrich, sensing his imminent downfall, grew more desperate. He launched a vicious smear campaign, spreading rumors that Martha was a witch, that her healing was dark magic. He started offering money and land to anyone who would be willing to lie on the stand for him. The town became a tinderbox. The battle lines were drawn. On one side, a corrupt mayor with money and influence. On the other, a healer, a drifter, and a small band of ordinary people who had finally decided they had had enough. As the story closes, for now, the citizens who support Martha have organized. They stand watch over her cabin, protecting her from Aldrich's desperate thugs. Every ally is gathering their evidence, preparing their testimony. The air is electric with anticipation. On the horizon, two riders appear, their silhouettes stark against the setting sun. Judge Carter and the U.S. Marshal have arrived. The trial for Josiah Coleman's land, for his murder, and for the very soul of Cedar Ridge is about to begin.